Good evening, everyone. We're getting started in 1 minute. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Masonic Seminar Series. My name is Brother Katie Quincie, and I am your host and lecturer for this particular group that is coming from Universal Co-Masonry. We're going to go over what we're about, just for those who are joining us that are new, and we're going to talk about where we're going, and then we're going to launch into a presentation tonight on Freemasonry and Dogma. Universal Co-Masonry is a Masonic organization for men and women without distinction against any race, gender, or creed or orientation. It was created, I should say, Masonic Seminar was created back in 2018 to help provide information for those who feel a calling to become a Mason, who are a Mason, and both want more information. So that is what we do here, is we provide information about Freemasonry in various aspects. And as I said, tonight we'll be talking about Freemasonry and Dogma. The purpose is not to divulge any particular points or aspects of the ritual that we use. So if you are coming from a different obedience, please don't be offended if I cut you off if you start bringing up things that are specific to different ceremonies such as initiations, passings, and raisings, as we like to reserve that experience for each individual to undergo when the time comes for them. Masonic Seminar Series is one of two groups of Universal Co-Masonry that is given to the community for free. And that is, the other one is going to be Masonic Philosophical Society, which is a different type of group in that it's more of a discussion based. So if you're looking for lots of discussion between lots of different individuals across different continents and organizations, then that would be the place for you. Here at the Masonic Seminar Series, we are lecture-based, so lucky you get to listen to me for the next hour and a half, talk about Freemasonry. I will stop periodically throughout the presentation tonight to field any questions. I do ask that you keep your questions on topic and that we don't segue into something different, so that way we can respect that everyone's here for the particular topic. If you have questions or comments and the time arrives, please use that virtual hand option if you're coming in on Zoom. If you're coming on our other platforms, then we have Brother Patrick Alessandro, who's working on X, YouTube, and Facebook, who will help give your questions a voice and ask them on your behalf. If you prefer to do your answers, or excuse me, your questions by chat, Brother Benjamin Hartle will be running our Zoom, and he will help field those questions by chat as well. So lots of opportunities to share your thoughts and to ask your questions. So without further ado, I'm going to pull up my presentation for you. Give me 1 second. Can everyone see that okay? Looking good? Nope. Let's try that again. Helps if I share my screen instead of just look at my screen myself, because I already know what it looks like. So As I said, today we're going to be talking about Freemasonry and dogma. And who am I to talk to you about this? A little bit about me. I have been a Freemason with Universal Co-Masonry since 2002, so for a little bit of time. And I have spent the last 2 decades studying Masonry in its various aspects and passing through the various degrees that it offers. So, what you are getting is my understanding at this point in time on what Freemasonry and this particular topic has to say. We do have these on, you can record it. So if you want to jump on YouTube and watch any past session, you may see that there might be actually another presentation just like this one. But I like to update all my presentations. I don't like getting the same thing. I never have. So if you see that there's a Freemasonry and Dogma, or it was previously called Freemasonry and Landmarks, you will get a totally different presentation. If you want more on that, you can look at our YouTube page for that. Um, the one thing I want to say about Masonry is that it's very experiential. You have to experience it yourself. And one of the things I appreciate at Universal Co-Masonry is that you can't do your ceremonies online. You can't do them by proxy. You have to do them physically. And that has a lot to do with ingraining you as an individual and steeping yourself in the great mystery dramas of the ancient schools of past. And you can only do that if you physically put yourself through the ceremony so that you can experience and graft into that consciousness that perhaps maybe you haven't before. So, we're going to talk a little bit about not necessarily ritual itself, but we're going to talk a little bit about the dogma and landmarks because they go hand in hand. Um, Let me get you there. So I want to talk a little bit about dogma first before we get into landmarks versus dogma, because that's where we're going. We're going to spend actually quite a large amount of time on landmarks, even though it's connected to and kind of holds hands with dogma. In modern terms, dogma has a really, really negative interpretation by a lot of people who are either a-religious or irreligious, or are non-religious in the sense that they don't attend an organized religion. It's often used as a pejorative, like, oh, I joined Masonry because I don't like dogma. It's very negative. One of the things that I have found through my experiences being a Mason is often the reclamation of old, terms and putting them back in their original context. Because dogma does not mean what it means now when it first came out back in the days of Greece. So what we see is that in the Greek origin of the word dogma, which I will not try to pronounce it in Greek, um, dogma meant in good opinion of. So it was in the best interest of, it was in a good opinion of, and it was by authority. So it was, the idea in masonry is being ruled by your betters, by your elders. Um, but it didn't have this idea of absolute laid down doctrine that you can't disagree with, that it has today, that definition. It just meant in good opinion and by good authority. So it went from a Greek usage into ecclesiastical, into late Latin, and it started to be adopted. So it went from Greek, went to the philosophical school, started to take it more as a decree by authority, such as Stoicism and whatnot. Then it went into ecclesiastical and late Latin, and it started to be more like articles of faith. These are the things that we believe in and that you have to believe in if you're going to say your whatever religion that you're talking about. And then it got modernized into what it means today, which is just, you cannot refute it. It is a truth as it stands. So a lot of people, let's tie this back into Freemasonry, a lot of people will say, well, Freemasonry has no dogma. And that is just not true. It's not the dogma of modern times. That part's true. It's not that there's this truth that can't be denied that everyone has to accept. It's not like that. It's more on the idea of in good opinion and good faith and good morals, more in that ancient Greek kind of interpretation and not so much that modern idea. So dogma is in Masonry, and I've said it before, you have, Morals and Dogma, which is a very famous Masonic book. So there is dogma, but it is not something that if you don't believe in it, you can't be a Mason. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Dogma requires landmarks. Landmarks, you'll hear a lot about Masonic landmarks, and the Masonic landmarks are going to give you a boundary, where dogma is going to give you definition. So I want to talk a little bit about the difference between the two and I'm going to put them in Masonic context. And I am talking, and again, when I say dogma, I'm not talking in the modern usage of the word. I'm talking in the Greek usage of the word, again, meaning in good moral authority. So, origin and authority, you're going to see that dogma is going to come out of an authority. It is a decree that is given by authority. Landmark is an inherent boundary. It is the way, like, think of buoys or lighthouses that guide the parameter of a given body of water. That would be landmarks. They're spotted all over the coast. They're in certain areas to help navigate ships. Now, dogma would be, how do you navigate that ship? Where does that ship go and how does it move? That would be the dogma. The landmark would be the boundary within it. And the way I like to use the idea is, imagine that there's an esoteric body of water. That esotericism, occultism, all that hidden knowledge that's running undercurrent is a massive body of water. And you're going to have landmarks that are going to define different esoteric organizations. So you have Freemasonry, you have Martinism, you have Rosicrucianism, and you have other different esoteric organizations. And they're going to have their own landmarks, and that's going to make them distinct. If you stay within these landmarks, then you're staying within that philosophy of esotericism. And those landmarks can overlap and they can touch just like bodies of waters do. Again, the dogma is going to be more with inside of those boundaries and where, how is something going to be defined. When we look at the purpose of a dogma, you're looking at it to help guide, right? It's telling you how to navigate. Where you're going to see a landmark is more fluid. It's much more organic. It's movable, but it's not, because if you see the flexibility, which is right underneath, landmarks are immutable, especially in Masonry. They are not something that can be changed. The dogma, is going to come out of something that's going to be mutable. It's something that is interpretative. It's going to be described differently. It's going to be moved differently. It's going to have different definitions. The way that I would put landmarks and dogma in a more singular focus is landmarks are certain tenets that one would have to subscribe to in order to fit best in that esoteric water. So oftentimes I get asked, can atheists be Masons? Well, depends on, first off, which body of water of Masonry you want to join. There are different bodies of water. They're just like there's different seas in the world. There are organizations that are secular. They tend to be in continental Europe, and they focus on civil reform. So they, predominantly are atheistic. So if you want to be an atheist and a Mason, that would be more where you would want to go. There are other Masonic obediences that say, no, you have to believe in something higher than yourself, something that is greater than humanity. That would be a landmark. So there is an idea that atheists can't be Masons, or they can, like that's either one or the other. Again, it just depends. Sorry, it's dry here. It just depends on what body of water you're trying to navigate. So when you look at the landmarks, that's going to be the type of Masonic organization or esoteric organization you belong to. In Universal Co-Masonry, we're going to actually look at the landmarks of Universal Co-Masonry specifically. And we'll talk a little bit about Mackey, Brother Albert Mackey, and his landmarks that he discusses at great length. But when we look at dogma, and I'm going to be talking specifically about Universal Co-Masonry because that's where my knowledge lies. I've never been a Mason in another organization, so I can't speak on anyone else's behalf. The dogma lies in how the ritual is done, not to be confused with how one interprets the ritual. So we were just coming off a convention here at headquarters where we performed specific degrees, and my brothers here, Brother Benjamin and Brother Patrick and I, we all experienced the same meeting. Where we have freedom of interpretation is how those meetings impacted us and how those rituals impacted us and how we interpret the symbols and the experiences and all of that. That is something that Universal Co-Masonry will never touch. It doesn't tell you, well, that symbol has to be interpreted in this way. The symbol tells you that how to interpret it, but you have to uncover that yourself. What is not up for interpretation is how the ritual is done. So if we had 3 meetings of the same degree, so if Brother Patrick, Brother Benjamin, and myself held the same position, each one of us per meeting, we have to do it the same way. We can't be like, well, I don't like that part, or I'm going to add this in. You can't innovate. Like the ritual has to be done. And if you're wondering, well, why is that? Well, Masonry asserts that ritual has theurgy. It has a ceremonial magic. And when I say the word magic, I am not talking the modern sense. I am talking of the deep, occult, esoteric sense, something that is greater than the parts. It's synergistic. It's huge. And when you do, it's just like a chemical procedure, you have to add chemicals in a certain way for certain outcomes to happen. For example, if you want to mix water and acid together, you can't just mix one and then throw the other because you can get an exothermic reaction. Exothermic meaning a lot of energy is released and it gets so hot that it can shatter your glassware. So it's directional, it matters. So when you're mixing water and acid, let's say it's a sulfuric acid or a nitric acid, when you're mixing them together, you have to add the acid into the water. You can't do it the other direction. And theurgy is much the same way. You have certain ways it has to be done. So the dogma comes in, and this is where the head of the order comes in, and masters of lodges, which are the head of the lodges, they help us understand how to do the ritual correctly so that we can have the right outcome. And that depends on what you're doing. So the dogma doesn't come in the modern sense of like, you will believe this, and this is how you must interpret it. And I'm saying that because I'm your authority. It doesn't come in that way. It comes in physicality. How do you physically do or say a thing in a ritual? So dogma isn't a pejorative in Masonry. It can be if you're using it in the modern sense, but really in its true essence, the dogma allows for the theurgy of ritual to be. The landmarks give context to the dogma. So if you're talking about social reform in a lodge, unless there's a context to it, that social reform doesn't necessarily fit. Now, if we were a secular organization that would work with social reformation, then that would be perfect, and there'd be a certain way that you would deliver that, and so that all can experience it. So that is the difference between landmarks and dogma. So dogma would be the ritual, again, not interpretation, but the enactment of it. And the landmarks are going to be those lighthouses or buoys that demarcate the Masonic philosophy from other different philosophies and interpretations out there. So I don't know if there are any questions. I'm going to stop here in about 2 seconds to see if there's any questions or comments. But the one thing I want to do just at the very front of this lecture is just to put it out there that dogma, in the sense of, dogma is bad, in Masonry, it has a totally different context and meaning. And no, there are certain things in lodge you don't have the choice to interpret and how to enact. But again, how you think about that is totally up to you. We say, and I think it's on our website, I know it's in our Declaration of Principles, it says that we believe in the maximum amount of discipline with complete freedom of mind. So we are very disciplined in Universal Co-Masonry. We sit a certain way. We have a formal language that we use. There's things that we do that are disciplined physically. But again, where we thrive, I think, even though we have that uniformity of discipline, our thriving in diversity comes in, well, if we want to sit down and talk about the meetings we just had, the 3 of us here, we could have a very robust conversation because there's many different angles that we'll be coming from. And that's the beauty. That's the unity in diversity and diversity in unity. I'm going to stop here and see if there's any comments or questions before I move forward. Again, please just make sure you stay on topic. Let's go with Tyler.
Yeah. So in the discussion of how ritual doesn't change, it stays the same, it's not immutable, or the way that it's categorized there. I just want some clarification there because I feel like, especially in the origins specifically of Co-Masonry, there's a lot of going back and forth about how the ritual specifically should be performed between different lodges. And then arriving over time at different iterations of ritual where we are now. So can we just clarify the line between those two things?
Thank you, Tyler. Let me see if I understand your question correctly. Because ritual does evolve, you're asking how that works, if it's there's not a chance for it to evolve. Is that correct? Okay, it's the head shake, yes. Okay. So the purpose of the head of the order, at least in Universal Co-Masonry, every Grand Lodge and Supreme Body is a little different, is to preserve the way the ritual is done. And so what happens is the head of the order's responsibility, one of their responsibilities, is to research rituals. So you have the Dharma ritual, the Lauderdale ritual, you have all these different rituals, and you're going to compare and contrast, and you have other rituals and that are, there's hundreds of rituals in Masonry. But there are certain things that you see in each ritual that even though they are different, like we'll take the North American ritual versus the ancient and accepted rite, and looking at the ritual inside of Universal Co-Masonry. Again, I'm not going to get any specifics, but if you look at their two ceremonies of initiation, there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of familiarity. But there's like their accoutrements on the side are a bit different. There might be something that's a little different here, a little bit different there. The head of the order goes through and looks at each of the rituals and sees what's consistent and says, okay, this is something that cannot change. This is something that has to be the same. However, some of this other stuff is usually either master's choice, like, do you want this person to stand here or here? That might be master's choice. Or it might be the actual person themselves that's doing that particular office. There's a freedom of interpretation in there on how you want to execute that office. Those things are there. Like there again, Brother Patrick, Brother Benjamin, and I can do the same office, and it will look like we will go the same places in the lodge and say the same things, but it may look a little bit different because we're three different people, and there's a little bit of freedom in there and showing a personality through that. So there's going to be that evolution. Now, what has happened is rituals often get what's the word I want to say? They get watered down. Some of them are very good reasons, some of them are not, in my opinion. But you'll see like a restoration in a ritual where, because of like World War II or the Great Depression, where there wasn't a lot of resources or even people, you'll see that rituals get brought down from where, the robust fullness that they have to accommodate their times. Now, that you can decide whether that's good or bad on your own. I mean, to me, it is what it is. Like the Great Depression is the Great Depression. If you don't have certain things, you can't do certain things. And then what you'll see is typically the head of the order, when it gets to a period of time that allows for them to restore those things, they will restore it. But they won't innovate. They won't say, well, like, oh, well, we'll add this in here because, that's what I like and that's what I believe. There shouldn't be any belief in there. So there'll be evolutions in ritual because of personal interpretation when executing an office. There might be evolution in ritual because of circumstances that either cause for a time of, depletion or for having surplus or extra. And then there's just over time, you have to see the natural evolution of a ritual that happens because it's organic in itself. But again, there are certain things that do not change. So the ritual of 1900 is of, like Brother Louis Wazoo, who's one of the founders of Universal Co-Masonry, along with Antoine Muzzarelli. If they were to sit down and lodge with us, they wouldn't feel much different. It might have a little bit of a difference, but not much. And again, the head of the order should be protecting the Masonic ritual from the hijacking from any philosophy at any given time. So they stay very current with events. They see how things are, and then they have to protect it. So majority of members are one particular faith or understanding, that they don't change the ritual to accommodate their personal faith or understanding. The ritual needs to stand on its own. It's a very long answer to your question, Tyler, but it doesn't happen. There is evolution. It doesn't stay stagnant where at one time in Masonry, there wasn't 33 degrees, there was 25. And then there was more added on. And Supreme Councils didn't exist until, I should know the date on this. I think it was 1800s, or maybe late 1800s. Correct me if I'm wrong. Do you know dates better than I do?
Late 1800s.
I think it's late 1800s. Yeah, where they start to see Supreme Councils and all that start to show up. So there is definitely evolution, but the ritual and interpretation, there's very minimal changes. Glenn, you have your hand raised.
First of all, can you hear me on this thing?
I can.
Oh, cool. My thought is looking at ritual and understanding the pattern of the ritual, both psychologically and psychically, if you will. Very loose interpretation of psychic, but more of its psychological needs for the ritual, what needs to happen to create a possible change in the candidate as he's going through the journeys. Those kinds of things, while certain details can change, the journeys in themselves don't. The basic symbols of what they represent must remain, I think. But details can change over time. Like the French, we do right foot instead of left foot, things of that nature. But there's reasons behind that. But we have to remember Albert Pike's concept that as we go along these degrees, symbolism will change somewhat. We've got these 4 different interpretations of symbol. As we deepen and experience the pattern over time, which is why in my lodge, your first POA is what you felt about the ritual. What did you get out of it? Did you recognize the pattern? And those are the things that I kind of want to focus on, is trying to recognize the pattern and the reasons for that. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you, Glenn. And a POA, for those who are curious, is like an essay. It's like a paper, just in case you wanted to have a reference for that. Brother Maya, and then we'll get to Brother Patrick. Hold on, can you, Ben just stepped out. Can you get Brother Maya unmuted?
Yeah, one moment, please.
Never mind, I'm right here. I can do it. Look at that tower. A button. Okay, Brother Maya.
Thank you, Brother Katie. Is it okay to ask a question about landmarks, or are we just concentrating on ritual right now?
Why don't you ask a question, and if I defer it, forgive me, but if it's something we can answer now, I'm happy to do so.
Okay. If landmarks are not to be written down, are we left to ascertain them for ourselves individually, or is there a group understanding or someone who is tasked with understanding the landmark for a particular order? Whose responsibility is it to know what the landmarks are?
That's a great question, and we'll actually answer that now. It's everyone's responsibility to know what the landmarks are if you're going to be a Mason. Like, I mean, in context, what we're talking about, like if you are going to be a Mason or are a Mason, you should know the boundaries in which you sit in. Because one, you need to see where you are in those spaces. And I would say the person who applies for Masonry should be very aware of what those lighthouses are in the esoteric waters. So that way, if there's something they're like, yes, this is exactly how I feel, this is exactly where I fit in, or like, no. Imagine, and I have seen it before, where someone who is very spiritual joins an atheistic order because they didn't realize the landmark was different. And so they starve because they're not getting what they need. And likewise, if an atheist joins a spiritual Masonic order, they also are impacted negatively because they're not getting what they're looking for. So landmarks should be known by everyone. Landmarks are handed down through the centuries, depending on how old the obedience is. So centuries. So the landmarks, like we're going to go through the Universal Co-Masonry landmarks. They're on our website. And I'm going to talk about writing stuff down here in a second. They're there for everyone to see. Because, you know, again, I don't like buyer beware, because that's like very mundane, but it's kind of like that. It's like, just be aware of what you're looking at. And if this fits, great. And if it doesn't, I hope you find what you're looking for. So everyone should know when they're looking at Masonry, especially the organization they're a part of, what the landmarks are. And if they can't find it, if it's not available on the website and they're talking to a particular representative, they should ask the representative, you know, like, what are the basic tenets of your order? What is the things that you know, your ritual lays upon? That way you can see. It's kind of like, to throw another metaphor out there, is it's like blood transfusions. You gotta make sure the blood type's right for both places. You don't want there to be something wrong with that. And then to the other part of your question about things being written down, Masonry in and of itself was never meant to be written down. And yet we have rituals everywhere. Universal Co-Masonry is no exception, where our rituals are written down. The era of transmission to mouth to ear has passed. Thanks to the Gutenberg press, you know, and the ability for and literacy for people to read. So they are written down, and some people think that's great. Some people think that's wrong. There are pros and cons to both. When I'm going to use the word dogma, I'm going to use it in the pejorative sense. Oftentimes when they're written down, they become dogmatic and there's no interpretation allowed. And that's the downside. The upside is everyone knows what they are. And it is the job of the head of the order to ensure that those dogmas remain unstained from other philosophies. It should be purely Masonic. Unfortunately, you'll see in organizations where a particular mindset gets in and it will take hostage Masonry and it stops being Masonic because it becomes new landmarks and new interpretations. So great question on that, Brother Maya. All right, Brother Patrick.
So we have a question on YouTube. Andrew Koronek asks, do you foresee a time when the different bodies of Masonry will unite under one banner, or is it impossible because of landmarks?
What was his first name?
Andrew.
Andrew, what a beautiful question. Will all the different Masonic obediences unite under one banner? Or is it impossible due to landmarks? I will give you my idealistic and visionary idea and say, absolutely, I think that's great. I hope it happens. I wish it happens. I work towards that day. But when I say it works under one banner, it's not one, Grand Lodge, Supreme Council, or organization. It's not even I think, having different organizations, whether I agree with them or not in their interpretations, is a beautiful thing. Like, I would never tell the all-male Masons to not be all-male. Like, I have no problem. Like, I don't care if they recognize me or I recognize them. Like, if they want to exist, I think that's great. And if there's all-female Masonry, I think that's great too. I think the way of the future is Universal Co-Masonry. I think having both men and women and the organizations that do that, like the Draw Humane and the Eastern Order, they all have men and women. And I think that's the future, the uniting of the masculine and the feminine. I think that's my personal interpretation. And if someone comes in and says, well, we can't have, mixed masonry or co-masonry, I'd feel very sad because sitting in an all-female lodge, I miss the masculine energy. I have sat in all masculine lodges and it's missing the feminine energy. And they have their places, but there are some people who like where, that distinction. So when I say yes, they'll hopefully that they'll work under one banner, they'll still maintain their own individuality in that. Just like, having Masons or everyone here is their own individual, but we work under one banner. Now the landmarks, it can be tricky because there are some obediences that, you take an obligation that you won't sit in the lodge when a woman's being made a Mason. Like, I think that's pretty antiquated in my opinion. And I think there are better ways to do it, but that's fine. That's up to them to figure and reconcile that out with whoever they believe in. And so when we look at landmarks not allowing other landmarks, that's what caused the fissure between the United Grand Lodge of England and the Grand Orient de France. Like it's what the whole reason that they separated is because their landmarks started to conflict when the Grand Orient de France became, you didn't have to believe in a higher power to become a Mason. And so that caused the rift between Continental Masonry and English Masonry. There's also all of one skin color. You have Prince Hall. Now, typically it's all black Masonry for men. There are some Prince Halls that are white gentlemen, but that's what they choose to do. I don't necessarily think that having it one way is the right way to do it, but every order has its place, and landmarks will work themselves out because of interpretation and because of people of all organizations wanting to reach across the aisle and say, hey, look, I may not want to sit in lodge with a woman, but I'm not going to sit there and say you're not a Mason either. And there's going to be that ability. And there's treaties of amity between obediences and stuff like that. So it is possible the landmarks can get in the way if people choose to let it get in the way. But I don't think they necessarily have to. Again, another long answer to a very good question. Any more questions, Brother Patrick? All right, let's move forward. Great questions. Am I actually sharing my screen now? I am not a Luddite. I know how to use technology, but it's been a minute. Are you shaking your head and telling me I'm a Luddite, or are you not? All right. So this is, I'm going way too fast. So here is the thing on landmarks. I don't know why my image isn't showing up, but that's all right. Landmarks. So again, we're going to go from the 30,000 foot view of ritual and dogma to the more 30,000 foot Mount Everest view of landmarks. So landmarks are those ancient and therefore universal customs of the order, which either gradually grow into operations as rules of action, or if at once enacted by any competent authority, were enacted at a period so remote that no count of their origin is to be found in the records of history. So from time immemorial. So this particular, and before you pass out, I'm not going to do it all, but this particular presentation has like 45 slides. I'm not going to do 45 slides. But the latter half is a bunch of landmarks I pulled out of Mackey's books on landmarks that I thought were interesting that, you know, if we run short on time, we can go over at another point. But landmarks, Mackey did write down the landmarks, and a lot of people hold to them as that dogma. That's, you know, you can't go outside of this. And I don't think that's what Mackey had in mind when he did his particular landmarks. Can you not see my images? I am very sad. I worked hard on my images. Let's see if we can get this to work. Technical difficulty. Let's see. Why are my images missing? Huh, because the picture can't be displayed. All right. All right. There is in the book of Proverbs 2020 to 2028, it talks about how landmarks should not be removed. It says, remove not the ancient landmarks which thy father has set. Now, in the United States, and I can only speak for the United States, this can rub against us because we don't like it when there's an authority above us. But we have to look at traditions and taboos in a different light. We need to get out of the infantile mindset of pure freedom, unadulterated freedom and individuality, and realize that we belong to civilization and society. And those require taboos and traditions and customs. And they have a purpose. And remember, taboos and traditions and customs aren't necessarily written down. They're not laws. So you're going to see that they tend to be more organic. And the older I get, the more I realize how right my parents were in many things. So I think maturation in this spiritual sense is extremely important. So when we are looking at these landmarks, these are the landmarks of Universal Masonry specifically. Like I said, if you go to different obediences, you need to ask what those landmarks are. So the belief in a supreme and absolute creative intelligence. This is each word is very much placed appropriately, meaning that it doesn't say a supreme being. So if you do believe in some, you know, an anthropomorphic God that is personified and is in human form or some type of personage, there's nothing wrong with that. Likewise, if you believe that it is an all-pervasive force, the first cause that has no form and is, you know, infinite and without boundary, like that's fine too. But you have to believe in something higher. Now, why is that? Because people are like, well, that's dogma. No, it's not. Because if you don't believe in it, that's fine. No one's saying you're wrong. What we're saying is that if you want the rituals that the universal and ancient accepted rite uses, which is what we use at Universal Co-Masonry, you will want to have these in place for yourself so that the ritual makes sense. So if you don't believe in the great architect of the universe, again, everyone must come to their own understanding. And if that's the understanding you're at, that's fine. But the rituals won't sit with you. They won't graft into your consciousness. They won't elevate you from where you're at because they won't speak to you. Ultimately, what the landmarks do, it gives you a common language between you and the ritual. So you have to find the landmarks that speak your language. You also have to have a little bit of intellectual and spiritual humility to possibly think, well, maybe I need to look at some of my own personal landmarks and see if I actually believe in them. And if I do, why? Be more informed about it. And possibly, as the Hermetics say, you know, all truths are but half truths. So maybe there's some more information there that I can have and learn and grow from. So the belief in the supreme and absolute creative intelligence. In Masonry, we call it the great architect. Some obediences says the grand architect. It is the same thing. And this is the idea that there's something that is much, much higher than just the individual. So the belief in a supreme and absolute creative intelligence. Now, I'm not going to sit there and say, well, this is what supreme means and absolute creative intelligence means this. Like, that's dogma in the modern sense. In Universal Co-Masonry, you have to figure that out yourself. What is the great architect to you? Is it an anthropomorphic person? Anthropomorphic meaning of a personified form. It's a human being with, you know, celestial ethereal being? Is it the idea of Zeus or a Thor, or is it something that is more ubiquitous and transcends in a totally different way? The rituals in Masonry offer you experiences through the symbols. And I liked what Glenn said with the symbols and how symbols are trying to get you to understand certain truths. Through those experiences, that's how you will come to understand your truth. And it's not just like you sit in lodge and, again, as I like to say, you unzip your head and open it up and there's a divine download and you shut it and you leave and then you're like perfectly changed. There's a lot of hard work into it. Rituals are not only meant to inspire, but they're supposed to also challenge you, where you hit something and you're like, man, that's rough. I don't know how I feel about that. What do I believe? And it makes you go back and meditate. And if you believe in prayer and you study, it's supposed to be active. So a lot of times people are like, well, what do you think the great architect is? And it's like, well, I mean, I think we spend our whole life trying to figure out what that is, and hopefully that evolves. Oftentimes I would say, well, go look at the different great religions of the world and see what they define the supreme creative intelligence as and the great architect as, and see what sits with you and what doesn't, and study it and come to a better understanding so that you know exactly what you're operating under. Because do I think the rituals are divine? Yes. Do I think they were written by the great architect? Not like in the sense of a volume of sacred lore or a sacred text, not like that. I think that whoever wrote the rituals over all the Masonic obediences in ancient times were divinely inspired. So I think in that sense, yes, there's a lot of divinity in it, and having the understanding of a creative intelligence and how that works helps better unlock the secrets of the ritual itself. My favorite, the permanence of the soul, the immortality of the soul is another way of saying it. This is extremely important. The great mystery schools of antiquity teach us all how to meet death with a friendly face and how to meet it with reverence to ourself and respect for the process. It does it through experiences, it does it through ritual, it does it through dramas and legends and stuff like that. This is important because the permanence of the soul, meaning that once you die, your soul, however you wish to define that, some people interchange soul and spirit, some people separate the two, however you define it, continues on. And again, that soul doesn't necessarily have to be, this is Katie and my soul. Katie leaves and goes to, the 7 gates and goes up through the hermetic, ladder of virtue. Like, it doesn't have to be my entity as itself. It could be a completely different understanding. It can be reincarnation in the sense of the various traditions around the world. It can be, going to heaven because the soul persists beyond death. So ultimately, one of the landmarks is that when you die, it doesn't just, you just dissipate and that's it. And there's nothing left of you. There is something that persists on. And this one personally, I find very fascinating. I find them all fascinating, but this one has spoken to me a lot over the last couple of years, because it's like, well, what do I believe in? Well, let's say I believe in, I die and I go to a place, and that place is either a great place, depending on my life, or it's a terrible place, depending on my choices. But what does that look like? And it's not just about how I feel, but what of all the great spiritual traditions over the eons of time? What do they say? Because they know a lot more. They've been tried and proved a lot more than I have in my short amount of lifespan. And then I want to sit with those, each one of those, and see what they say. And then, well, maybe reincarnation is the answer. Well, let's look at all the other traditions that believe in reincarnation in some form and get a broad understanding of all the different interpretations. And then I can sit down and say, okay, well, this is what Masonry does. Because Masonry doesn't say, oh, the Hindus have it correct, or oh, the Christians have it correct. It doesn't say that at all in Universal Co-Masonry. It doesn't say that at all. So I need to understand what the rituals say. So it's kind of a two-pronged study. It's very bifurcated, but it overlaps, because you're going to see that you are studying all the different traditions of the world, trying to understand a particular idea. And then you're looking at Masonic ritual and saying, okay, what do I have here? And how does it sit upon my spiritual entity? How does it sit and resonate or not resonate with me? And coming to an understanding. Once I have that very informed way of approaching it. It's not that like I have to read a book and that book tells me what to believe. It's not like that. It's that book is there to inform. Masonry is there to inform. I need to sit down and understand so I can come to my decision. One of the requirements to become a Mason is that you have to have a sound mind and strict morals. And this is part of there's lots of reasons, but this is one of the reasons why. A sound mind can look at it and say, all right, these are all the different beliefs on this particular topic, in this case, the permanence of the soul. Now, my mind is going through, I have my own experiences and my own filters and my understanding, and I'm trying to grow that understanding. And then I have to sit with it and intuit how it is done. As it was said earlier, like when I use the word psychic, I'm not using it as in the modern sense. I'm using it as in the faculties that are beyond the five senses that we have, intuitions, premonitions, those type of things that people have dreams that are super informative and tell them all sorts of stuff, like using those tools that only you can access and coming to an understanding. And then you can better understand what it means to you, the immortality of the soul. I'm not going to go into any deep experience, but I did, or detail rather, of my experience. I did have a brother many years ago. She had flown out from New York, and she just on the whim was like, "Hey, I'm here, and I'm going up to one of the universities that's up north, and Brian Weiss, who wrote Many Lives, Many Masters, is going to be there and present, and I have an extra ticket. Would you love to come?" I didn't know who Brian Weiss was. So I was like, sure, whatever, spend time with a bro. Sounds great. So we went, and it was really an interesting experience because for those who aren't familiar with him, he did past life regressions, which I didn't know when I got there. And he did the whole audience, and it was an experience. I was like, dude, I don't know what just happened, but I'm going to take it and I'm going to put it in a box, and I'm going to put it in the shelf of my head, and I'm going to let it sit there until I know what to do with that experience. And I think, we all have moments like that, if we just allow ourselves to be open to different ideas, that it allows us to have a better understanding. One last thing I want to say about this is I was talking to another brother many years later, and we were talking about when we read stuff, when we're reading different books and coming to different understandings. Oftentimes in Western culture, we like to say, well, I don't agree with that. Well, that's wrong. And this brother offered me a different way of looking at it. And I have to tell you, it is a rewiring of my hardware because I'm very much a Western girl. I live in Western society, and I very much have said, I don't agree with that more times than I probably should have. And he said, well, have you ever thought that everything you read is true? But maybe you don't understand the context in which it is true. And so when you sit down and you read something, the critic in me wants to be like, that's wrong, that's wrong. Like, I know, because I'm an expert on everything, it's like, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. And it's like, instead of doing it from that approach, maybe reading it and saying, okay, I've read this particular piece of literature. I'm going to read some other pieces of literature that are related, and then I'm going to create an understanding of the landscape. And then I'm going to place my understanding on top of that landscape, and then maybe I can have an opinion that is more accurate to the form. And that has been revolutionary. And I would challenge those who are up for a challenge to try that, to understand the context in which things are written, and not as like, oh, that is the sole truth, that is the 100% understanding. It's the symbol of the circumpunct, right? You have the point within a circle. You have the point, in this case, it's the immortality of the soul, because that's what we're talking about. And then you have the circumference all the way around, and there's points that go all the way around, 360 degrees. And every time you read something on that particular point, on that subject, it's giving you a different insight. So it is true from that perspective. But is it going to be the absolute truth from the other perspective? No. But as we start to fill out all of the circumference, we can better understand the point within the circle. And that's what I would recommend with all of the landmarks. And the landmarks that aren't even on here that belong to other obediences, check it out. See what it means to the immortality of the soul. Meditate, dream about it, whatever it is that you do. Really come to an understanding that's not just like, I think it exists. Well, why? Because when you come to Masonry, we'll ask you, that's great, why? And you want to have some type of understanding that's deeper than just what you think on the surface. The third landmark is the existence of a divine plan guided by the spiritual and scientific forces of evolution. So in Universal Co-Masonry, it's not that you have to be solely spiritual or solely scientific. It means that it is a holistic plan. that everything has a purpose. Because evolution, if you take it, evolution, there's spiritual evolution and there's scientific for, natural evolution, biological evolution is a better way to put it. They should work hand in hand based on an understanding. Evolution is the positive adaptation of a form to its surroundings. And the key word is positive, right? It's not evolution if it's a negative adaptation that ends in your ending. Like, that's not good. So, and that's true with spiritual evolution, that there are positive adaptations that allow you, Brother Benjamin, you take off the art, please. Thank you. That will allow you to come to a greater consciousness. We're ultimately trying to climb the level of consciousness to become more and more a part of the divine plan. Whether or not you're more of a spiritual person or a scientific person, you need both. In science, when I say science, I'm not talking about modern science in the term that we have today. I'm talking about scientific forces being that it's a process. It's a way of doing things that allow you to move through. So you have the divine plan that's guided by both, it's the spiritual and scientific forces of evolution being, guided by a divine plan. I used Vitruvian Man because I think I think it's absolutely beautiful piece of art and symbolism. But if you notice, there's different positions of the Vitruvian Man, the perfect man. You have the cross and you have the five-pointed star laying on top of each other in the form of the man. And they both are needed. You can choose whatever one based off of your understanding, what is spiritual, is it the five-pointed star or the cross, what is scientific? But when you lay them together, you have a complete man. And you have the squaring of the circle, which we know is a mathematical impossibility if you follow the rules. You cannot square the circle because the surface areas cannot be the same, given the restrictions that are on it. So the ritual lies on this idea that there is a divine plan, and that divine plan is going to work with evolution. It deals with growth. So we sit there in our lives and we have obstacles, all of us, trials and tribulations. Those are natural forces to help us evolve if we choose to evolve. And if we rely on the idea that this is all happening for a reason, which is another way to say it's a divine plan, everything happens for a reason, we just have to figure out how to navigate through that and how to interpret it, then the obstacles aren't so overwhelming that they can't be accomplished. They can't be overcome. So the third landmark is that there is a divine plan and that it has both scientific and spiritual forces working for the evolution of the individual. And that does not just mean the spiritual evolution, it means the entire evolution of the individual. Your body and your mental and your spiritual capacities all are evolving together. So in Masonry, there's not like a plan. It's like, you have to eat well. Like you can't drink, you can't smoke, you can't have meat. It doesn't have any of that, where you'll find some esoteric orders too, where you can't have meat or you can't drink or smoke or stuff like that. What Masonry tries to do is to get you to come to an understanding of how do you get your body physically, mentally, and spiritually to evolve simultaneously, instead of one body jumping ahead of the other. And maybe you believe that one body has to jump ahead for the other one to go. I debate that all the time with brothers. Either way, you need all the bodies to work in tandem to evolve to the perfect man. I'm going to do one more, and then we're going to stop for comments and questions. So the fourth landmark in Universal Co-Masonry is the development of a universal brotherhood without distinctions. The reason why I chose this particular picture is because in many Masonic obediences, we wear gloves. And the idea is so that you don't know the prince from the worker, the prince from the farmer, that everyone is equal, spiritually equal on every level. So in Universal Co-Masonry, we don't sit there and say, well, you can join because you are or aren't this particular, race, color, creed, religion, orientation, belief system. We don't do selection based off of that. We judge people on their morals. We judge people on the stability of their mind, on whether or not they are of mature age. That doesn't necessarily mean 21. It could be, I know lots of older people who are emotionally, mentally, spiritually immature. It means we're looking at the individual on merits that are specifically to them. Everyone is created different and everyone's created the same. And in Universal Co-Masonry, everyone is spiritually the same. So, I've had heads of the lodges that were much older than me and much younger than me. And it doesn't matter because it's not about age. It doesn't matter if they're male or female. So you will find that in many of our lodges and all of our lodges, we have people who have different political affiliations. You have people who are of every different culture you can think of. We have people who believe religiously differently, even if that's a spiritual difference, not necessarily Christian or non-Christian or Muslim or not. We have people who believe all different types of spiritual creeds. We have people of all different orientations. We don't care. Like, it's not about who you love or who you go home to or what you believe in so much as the particulars. What we care is, are you a good moral person who's trying to evolve humanity and believes in the goodness of humanity and the potential of humanity, that it's not just a big pile of, endings that we're all going to end in dismal failure. That's what Masonry is about. You will find, as I have mentioned, that there are obediences that look for all men, all women. Some are very progressive, some are super conservative. You have people of different skin colors. You have a lot of different distinctions. In Universal Co-Masonry, that's not what we look at. So I'm going to stop here and see if there's any comments or questions before we move forward. Brother Patrick?
So I have two questions here in YouTube. The first is from Raiden, who asks, could we be the mental projections of our digital self, like in the Matrix? I think they asked this when you were talking about the immortality of the soul. So could we be mental projections of our digital self?
I mean, how would I know? I have no idea. I mean, if that's what you believe in, I don't know. I mean, I've read the Brian Greene holographic universe, looking at that and various theories that are out there on what we are and what this material world is. And I would not be able to tell you one way or the other. Is it possible? Sure. Is it not possible? Sure. Probability either way. I think what it comes down to is coming to an understanding, if you believe in that, coming to an understanding of why you believe in that. Not just because it's a really awesome theory. It's like, well, why? What makes you think that's what it is? Be informed about that particular belief. But yeah, you can believe that.
The next question is from Rufus, who asks, do Freemasons believe in an externalization of God separate from man? Doesn't the King James Bible say the kingdom of God is within you? And this was asked during the Supreme Intelligence session.
So do we believe that there's an external entity?
Like, is God outside of ourselves or within ourselves?
Yes. It is both. God is outside and within. I love that passage where, the kingdom of God is within us, but it's also around us, and I think oftentimes you'll find Masons try to be very good stewards of the world around them because it is the great architect's plan, as well as we should be stewards within us. We are just as important as the external. So absolutely, it is both. It is not just one or the other. Any other questions? All right, Glenn, you got your hand up?
Just a quick idea. Every lodge I've ever been into, politics and religion are outlawed as things to discuss because the focus is on your ethics and your behavior. Freemasonry is to make people better. And in lodge, we don't discuss things that could be divisive. At least to me, that's a key factor. Looking at one's moral ethics and polishing that particular ashlar is the key. Bringing in divisive concepts sort of takes away from that. And I think a term I use when a concept of God is panentheism versus pantheism or theistic. But in the French Rite, we don't care. That's an individual's interpretation. How you perceive your God is yours. All we're asking you to do is to sit down and think about it. Meditate on it, like a contemplative form of Masonry. And I'm getting preachy. My apologies.
That's all right. Thank you, Glenn. I will have to say there's many things that Glenn said that I agree on. You know, you don't want to talk about things that are, you know, that are become divisive and cause brothers to get really upset. However, where Universal Co-Masonry is a bit different is we do talk about religion and politics all the time. The difference is that we don't talk about ideas. Like I wouldn't sit there and be like, all right, so in Lodge, like how do you think the president's doing? Or the prime minister, depending on where you are. We don't talk about that, but we do talk about, like, next month. I was going to announce this at the end, but I'll announce it now. I've asked Brother Matthias to be a guest speaker, and he's going to do his Freemasonry and politics and political theory next month for us. And the reason why we talk about the idea, so like, what is the best form of governance? Is it democracy? Is it representative democracy? Is it oligarchy? Is, you know, like, what is it that are the best form of government? So we talk about the big ideas. We don't talk about specifics. Like I wouldn't sit there in Lodge and be like, oh, I think this president is or is not doing good. Like every brother has the right to vote and believe however he or she feels. But we do talk about religion and politics again in the big ideas. So I've sat on an essay where someone was talking about Freemasonry and Christianity, you know, and they talked about the pros of it and the ideas and where it was coming from, and talked about the, you know, the negative impact it might have had. But it wasn't so much like I think it was great or I think it was bad. It was, this is what history is, and this is what the esotericism is, and this is the mysticism of it. And then the brothers were left to discuss it. So we're a little bit different in that regard. But we don't talk about anything that is divisive. So, for example, if we're sitting there and we're talking about a particular religion and it starts to get very divisive, it is the right worshipful master's responsibility to change and redirect the conversation to something more productive. It is our understanding that the best way to truly understand individuals is to understand where they are in ideas of governance, both spiritually as well as secularly. So a little bit different on that. Brother Maya.
If one of the landmarks aspires to a universal brotherhood, do you think eventually there would have to be a universal list of landmarks that everybody agreed upon to achieve that?
No. It's much like the Constitution of the United States. There are certain things that make our Constitution unique to the United States. But what is not enumerated in the Constitution or any of the amendments is left to the states, and for the states to decide how to interpret. Freemasonry is much that way. If we have an understanding at a general level, then each obedience is left to further declare one way or the other. So no, I don't think that a set, like, this is how it has to be. There's no way. If the minute you say this is how it has to be, there's already going to be a group that's not going to be a part of that. So no, universal brotherhood, you cannot be universal if it is so specific that it doesn't include everyone. However, Masonry works for the light, so it can include everything. So it's kind of a it's not a catch-22, it's a paradox, is what I would say.
So what would your definition of universal brotherhood be then?
That anyone can be a Mason that is based off of who they are. And I liked, again, what Glenn said about, you know, that it's about your ethnics and your morality. It's not like, I don't care if you're Spanish, Caucasian. I mean, Spanish is Caucasian for many, you know, like, I don't care if you're Black, I don't care if you're Asian, I don't care if you're a woman, I don't care if you're like, those things don't make you or not make you a Mason, whether you're a Christian or a Muslim, or if you believe in, you know, animism and don't, like, those things, that doesn't define a Mason. Universal brotherhood is understanding that everyone comes as equals spiritually. Not that there isn't a hierarchy, which we'll talk about later, but everyone is a spiritual entity that has their own progression in play. So that would be universal. Universal doesn't mean everyone in the world is a Mason. It means that anyone who has the characteristics of morals and ethics can be a Mason, independent of their skin color, their religion, their political creeds, their sexual orientation, their gender. Like, those things do not dictate what's a Mason. Are there any other questions? Okay. Let us move forward. How are we on time? Oof. We're gonna have to push. I always think we're gonna get, have lots of extra time, and we never do. All right. Let's see if I don't. Okay. The presence of an ancient wisdom that has endured since time immemorial. That is going to dovetail into the fundamental unity of all religion. And I'm going to explain my pictures to you because I think they're very important. So this is a pearl that emanates. It is the seed that has formed all religions. And it's ancient, and it's, we can talk about extrapolation, but if we do interpolation where we go from the many and try to go all the way back and look at the source, that would be the ancient wisdom. That is why in Universal Co-Masonry, you can sit with people of any religious belief, and when I say religious, I mean spiritual too, that it doesn't matter because it's the details that we disagree with. Or maybe we do agree, it just depends, but it's not the big ideas, like the permanence of the soul, and that there's something higher than myself, and that all men and women and everyone is created equal in the eyes of that creative intelligence. That's where we sit. We're not comparative mythologists, we're comparative religionists. When we look at the difference, it's not so much when you do comparative religion, many people erroneously think that we're looking at how the religions are different. No, comparative religion looks at how religion is the same. So looking at all the different religions of the world and in past and through time, how are they all the same? That gets you back to the ancient wisdom. How it dovetails with the fundamental unity of all religion. And I chose a tree, and I used this many years ago for a MPS, a Masonic philosophical presentation I did on the philosophy of science, but it works just as well with religion. You have this really beautiful tree that has many different trunks on it, but it has one common, I should say, what are they called?
Branches.
Branches, not trunks. Only one trunk. That's the point. It has many different branches on it and different leaves, and you have this one trunk that goes into the earth with its roots. So imagine the trunks are all different religions, and the leaves are going to be interpretations of those religions. And you can pick all of the religions that have been, will be, and will ever be. And the leaves are going to be those expressions of it. But they come from a single trunk. And that trunk is what's feeding the branches. It's giving the nourishment. It's coming from the roots. And it's coming from the soil. And Masonry says that there is a fundamental unity of religion based on the fact that they're all seeded by this very ancient idea of ancient wisdom. Now, it is up to you as a Mason to find out what it is. Again, that's where Masonry is not dogmatic in the modern sense of the word. We're not going to sit there and say, that religion's correct, that one is wrong, this one is kind of right. It's not doing that. It's saying, look at all the religions. That's why Masons should be able to sit in any church, synagogue, mosque, temple, or holy structure and be able to pull something good out of it. You can sit there and be a part of it because we look for that which is ancient and not just someone's interpretation that they are telling that's what we have to believe. Now, we can choose to do that if we want, but ultimately we're trying to find the unity of all things. So those two are very, very close together. And number 6 is predicated on number 5. The reason why there's a fundamental unity of all religions is because of that seed of ancient wisdom that gives birth to all of them. And that's why in Universal Co-Masonry, the idea of a spiritual path and the creative intelligent force and the perennial wisdom, if none of that speaks to you, like this is the wrong tree. I want to get on it. Like I want to climb that tree whatsoever. If that's not the tree that you sit on, then you have to go find another tree because this is what Masonry is a part of. And you can even say that Masonry is like a tree with its many different obediences, interpretations, and whatnot coming off of it. Number 7, the organization of Freemasonry as a spiritual hierarchy. So if we refer to the law of correspondence, as above, so below, so above, as within, as without, as without, as within, Masonry is very hierarchical. So if you are sitting at a table of well-trained Masons, especially you'll find it in Universal Co-Masonry, if we're all sitting at a table and we're having lunch, or dinner, and we're just talking about whatever we're talking about. And then someone at the table, let's say someone who's not a Mason, asks a Masonic question. You will see that the entire table will typically defers to the right person. So if someone, if I was in the Master of the Lodge and I'm sitting down and someone says, oh, I have a question about the dues of the lodge, something as technical as that, a brother will say, you should ask the Master of the Lodge. Or if they say, what is your understanding of whatever, of this symbol, that brother is free to respond. This is my understanding, but you can ask any of the brothers here. So they understand there's hierarchy. And the reason why that hierarchy is there is so that we can better understand that there's hierarchy on the other side, things that we cannot see. Now, it doesn't sit there and say, there are 9 circles of angelic beings, and it doesn't get into the details. It says there is a hierarchy. And by learning the discipline of living in a hierarchy physically, we can understand the discipline spiritually. And you understand your place in that hierarchy in both places. The best run organizations in Masonry are those who follow their own rules. The constitutions, the general rules and regulations, the bylaws, the ritual, all of that creates perfect order. And that perfect order allows people to thrive. It allows them to understand their place and their purpose, and they understand how to evolve out of that place and purpose. I wasn't always a 33rd. I started out just at the beginning as everyone else, and I found my place and I moved along and I understood the rules and how to grow within that. So Freemasonry asserts that there is a spiritual hierarchy. And again, it is up to each Mason to understand the details of that hierarchy and how not just the Masonic, the physical organization, but the spiritual organization that governs all. So again, how you put the creative intelligence in there, how you tie in the divine plan, how you tie in what hierarchy looks like, all of that all plays into each other. So as you can see, as we start to build out these landmarks, it definitely starts to demarcate a very specific place that is going to be Masonry. You go outside of this, and you may find maybe some Masonic obedience is kind of on the side, but eventually you're not going to be in Masonry anymore. The further and further you move away from the landmarks, you're going to come into other landmarks that make for other organizations and other philosophies. This one's really, really important. And I think a lot of organizations, well, I would say a few organizations do a really good job at the power of legend, symbol, and ritual. Some organizations have created Masonry to be more of a social event, and I don't think that's the purpose of Masonry. But the 8th landmark is the power of legend, symbol, and ritual to transform and perfect. If you are new to legend, myth, and ritual, a really good place to start is the Hero of a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. The late Joseph Campbell was excellent in comparative religion and theology and mythology, and really looked at across the world the various religions and how legend, myth, and symbol really caused for a great transformation in humanity as a whole and as individual religions and individual people. Will you put that in the chat, the Hero of a Thousand Faces, please, for those who may not be familiar with Joseph Campbell? The power of legend, symbol, and ritual. Masonry is completely rested on this. If you look at Universal Co-Masonry, we're a little bit different in that we just don't have the first 3 degrees, not just the first, second, and third degree. We have from the 1st to the 33rd. And we have also in there the infusion of the English Rite. So the Royal Arch Mariner, the Mark Master Mason, Holy Royal Arch of Jerusalem. Those degrees are all part of one ladder, which I have been referring to throughout the night as the universal accepted rite. All of this is a grand Masonic drama. Each degree has a story to tell you that is a part of a bigger story, and is going to be given to you through ritual, but spoken in symbol. And the reason why it's spoken in symbol is there's no way that you can sit there and say, well, this is exactly what you're supposed to experience. This is exactly the way you're supposed to interpret it. It doesn't allow for that, because we are a universal. Because there are people of all walks of life that take the same ritual, they're going to approach it and experience, even this is the same thing, they're going to experience it differently. And it transforms them in the way that it needs to transform them. There's times when, you tell someone like, I had this great epiphany It was so amazing. And then you tell them and it just like falls flat. They're like, yeah, so. And you're like, but it's amazing. And they're like, yeah, not really. It's because you're trying to communicate something that is uncommunicable. It's something that has to be experienced. And Masonry firmly rests on this in the various degrees. Now, typically, depending on what obedience you belong to, once you join a Blue Lodge, which is the first, second, and third degree, you have to go join other organizations that give you different degrees. Like I said, with Universal Co-Masonry, we have one progression. So I did not have to go other places to get the different degrees that I have, which was wonderful because it showed me the whole picture by the time I got through and ascended through it all, the whole picture of what Masonry was trying to impart. Now, it doesn't mean that again, like I unzipped my head and everything just fell in and I'm like, oh yes, of course, that's exactly what it meant. I've had to fight for every inch of understanding that I've had because Masonry is nothing unless you breathe it life. You have to live with it for it to be real. And so legend, if you look at psychology, stories, fairy tales, legends, folklore, all of that speaks to our sense of self. We all have a story that we love for whatever reason, and it speaks to us. Harry Potter was all the rave. Not that there's nothing wrong with Harry Potter. I'm a Star Wars girl myself. I grew up on this, the original trilogy, and it's like bad acting, but such a good story, and I love the bad acting because it made the story even better. And it's like it spoke to me. There are people who Lord of the Rings. I'll throw Benjamin under the bus. Brother Benjamin loves Lord of the Rings. That speaks to him, and Brother Patrick, he has what speaks to him. Everyone has their own things, and that's the purpose. One size does not fit all. But when you have a ritual that speaks through a story that doesn't have a written language that can be interpreted by people who translate, there's no way you can concretize it. And this is essential to Masonry. There's many legends in Masonry, many stories that if you're not a big story person or legend person, it's not necessarily going to speak to you. All right, I have 10 minutes. Number 9. Interestingly enough, with as much discipline as I've talked about, we have the freedom of thought, speech, and action when used in the pursuit of wisdom. In Universal Co-Masonry, we don't tell people you are wrong. We don't say that. That we consider that unmasonic. Now, for an idea that you're like, I completely disagree with that, that's fine. And it's like, yeah, I don't agree with that at all. I think it's this, or I feel it's that. But no one's going to sit there and say, you are wrong. You have to think of it and understand it this way. Now, in Masonry, when you go through the degrees, you have expert brothers that assist you in your education because it is a very different world. Their purpose, again, isn't to tell you what to believe. They say, this is the ritual, this is how it's done. These are the different symbols in here. Here are the historical and spiritual contexts of those symbols. Now, when we put all those symbols together in this ritual, what is it telling you? Notice I didn't say, this is what it's telling you. I say, what is it telling you? Now that you have all the pieces and you're starting to learn how to read symbolism, what is it saying to you? Because the ritual defines the context of those symbols. So if I have a string of symbols that are coming out in a sentence, I'm talking like it's a language because it is a language, comes out in a sentence, the context of the ritual matters because if I take that sentence and I move those series of symbols to a different degree and put it in that context, it's going to say something different, even though they have the same intrinsic meaning in each degree. So there is the maximum freedom of thought. I have been told many years, many times, that someone doesn't agree with me, and I appreciate it because I am not right on everything, and I am right on some things. But at the same time, someone's sitting there saying, well, have you thought about it this way? Or what about this? And having that really dynamic conversation allows me to grow as an individual. So the best way I can describe this is I remember the head of our order one time was talking, someone had asked a ritualistic question, like, should we do it this way or that way? And the head of the order was like, this is how you have to do it, according to the way ritual's done. And then there was a follow-up question. Well, what does it mean? Like, why, like, what's the spiritual reasoning behind it? And the head of the order said, speaking on behalf, and the brother said the name, was like, speaking on behalf of myself, this is just my opinion, I think it means this. There's a distinction between office and person. The head of the order doesn't say, well, as most sovereign grand commander of the order, it means this. I mean, I've never, ever heard that ever said, because people tend to naturally lean into authority. So if the head of the order starts making the statements like they're coming from the head of the order, then people tend to think, well, that's what the order thinks, and that's what I have to think. And that really stamps down on that whole idea of freedom of thought, speech, and action. So there is freedom, but it's not unfettered freedom. There is context to it. You can't just walk up to someone and be like, you're wrong. You can't walk up to someone and say, hey, I think your ideas are crap. Like you can't, there's an etiquette behind it, and there's a tact to it. So one of the things we teach in Masonry is how to speak your thoughts. So if I went up to a brother, let's say it was Brother Benjamin, and I was like, I think you're wrong, the brother that's overseeing my education or the head of the lodge comes up to me and says, okay, we don't say that. That's unmasonic. Let me show you how you could have said it. Here's some alternative ways to say it. And so the next time you get into a discussion, you can say, well, I see it differently, or I like what you said, but I don't know if it's necessarily the same thing as what I think. And that allows for that universal brotherhood to endure, because there is conflicts. Not every brother is going to like every brother, and not every brother is going to agree with every brother. But we can sit down and say, okay, where do we agree? And what are the details that we don't agree on? And I find it spiritually fascinating that you think that. And I want to maybe take it home. And like I said, have that holistic perspective. Well, maybe they are right. And I'm just trying to insert myself and insist upon myself and say that I'm right just because I like being right. You know, it's the letting go and saying, well, they are right from their perspective. Looking at it from their angle, I can see why they would think that. You know, I've had brothers say, I think Masonry teaches us to be this religion or this political party or this, and it doesn't teach you to be one thing or another. It teaches you to understand what you believe in, and it's trying to get you to understand how to behave in a very moral way, in the way that you do believe in that, and how to conduct yourself. You cannot affect change when you are pissing everybody off. You have to find a way to speak the language of those that you work with. And that will require you to understand what you believe in, what they believe in, and how to bridge the gap. As they say in, I think it's in England, mind the gap. You know, you want to be aware of that so that you can transcend it. All right. The very last one, we won't get into the other 30 slides that I have on Mackie. We'll have to save that. This is what Brother Maya was talking about. The last and crowning landmark of all is this, that these landmarks can never be changed. Nothing can be subtracted from them. Nothing can be added to them. Not the slightest modification can be made in them, as they were received from the founders. The Freemason is bound by the most solemn obligations of duty to transmit them to their successors. So being a master of a lodge, and I've been a master of a lodge for a long time, our job is to ensure that there's no innovations or stamped interpretations on Masonry. So if, you know, a brother says, I think we can't accept so-and-so because they're not Christian, that's not a reason why we do that. That's not a landmark. We can say, well, they're, you know, they don't believe in anything higher than themselves, so they're not a good candidate for Masonry. That would probably be a good reason. And again, it's not because, you know, we're like, oh, shame on them, they don't believe in a creative intelligence. No, it's just that, as I said ad nauseum at this point, like the ritual doesn't speak to those who are atheists. They don't, unless, you know, they're that special atheist that they're transformed. But typically, if the language is so opposite in what they speak, then the language is, there's a barrier. It doesn't work. So as a master of a lodge, it is our job to make sure to support the Supreme Council and the head of our order, making sure that there's no innovations that have gone, you know, and co-opted or hijacked the landmarks. This makes it purely Masonic. So it doesn't matter what modern trends are, doesn't matter what, you know, the head of the order personally believes in. These landmarks are what they are, and they're not going to be changed. If the brother doesn't like them, they are free to leave at any time. No one's ever going to tell you you can't leave. You are free to leave as easily as you were free to come. Like everyone has to do what's best, but it is our solemn obligation to make sure that we don't change the first landmark to say that it has to be a Christian god or Islamic god or a Buddhist god, you know, no, not Buddhist, but you know, Hindu god. You know, it doesn't, we can't do that. The minute we start to restrict the landmarks the esoteric body starts to become very thin and becomes a very particular blood type, spiritual blood type. And it's very hard for it to thrive and to, when I say thrive, to help people who are looking to ascend their current state of understanding spiritually to something higher. And that's Masonry is there to cultivate light, wisdom, and concord among all people. And you can't do that when you're telling everyone, well, you're all wrong, and this is what you have to believe. You can't eat meat anymore. Well, if you don't want to eat meat and that's your spiritual belief, great, don't eat meat. But we're not going to stamp that on Masonry. You're this particular religion or political party, that's great. Can't stamp that on Masonry. That's not what we're doing. So this one is very, very firm. And I've not actually in my many years in Masonry seen anyone really encroach upon this, but there is a lot of discussion when we do, when we interview people who are looking to come in, we talk with the brothers like, look, you need to be mindful just because they don't have the same morality as you, or maybe you don't necessarily like that they smoke or they drink or whatever it is. It doesn't mean they can't be good Masons. You have to take them where they're at. You have to look at them at their morality and their context. So there's a lot of objectivity that goes into it so that we don't personally hijack what's going on. Likewise, we look at diversity in the lodge. As a master of a lodge, I don't want 25 Katie's. Like, that's a terrible idea. Hey, I might be not that bad, but 25 of me is awful. Like 25 of anybody is awful. Like, we want diversity. We want different political parties. We want different religions. We want different understandings. We want people who are super scientific, people who are super, spiritual. We want it all. We want it all. Because that is what makes us thrive. That is the true universal brotherhood. So on that note, I have hit the mark. It is 7:30 here in Colorado, so I am going to sign off. But I do want to leave you with this. Sit down and really look at what you believe in and whether or not Masonry is something that you want to be a part of or are a part of, or if you are a Mason, and it doesn't matter what obedience, how the landmarks inform your ideas or vice versa, and how that all works. Like, my point being is make it organic. Make it something that's living, because Masonry is supposed to be living. It's supposed to be a vessel of light, and it can't carry the light if you don't put it in there. The vessel itself is holy, and it is divine, and it is sacred and ancient. But for the light to shine, you have to light the fire. So make your belief system not just like, well, what do I think about that today? I don't like that because I grew up in that religion. I think they're crap. Like, that's not a really great way to approach it. You should look at the merits of everything and look at it and say, okay, well, what perspective does this come from that makes it true? And how does it tie into the whole idea? Circumpunct, that's the symbol of the day, is the circumpunct. Try to understand the landmarks in yourself within that capacity. I want to thank every one of you for spending your time with us this evening. If you're coming in North America, if you're coming from the Philippines, happy Tuesday morning to you. And thank you for spending your time with us. As I said, in the midst of our discussion, Brother Matthias will be presenting on Freemasonry and political theory. And I highly recommend you tune into it. He is a very interesting person. If you've not had the opportunity to speak to him or talk to him about these things, he is one of the brothers who presents on Legends of the Craft. If you're familiar with that podcast, I highly recommend it. I will be there to say hello, and then I will sign off and let him take over the reins in December. Have a wonderful holiday season wherever you are and whatever you celebrate. And I look forward to seeing you all in the near future. Have a great night.